introduce yourself. Tell us what your role is in Cooper Vision, kind of your background, and then how do you solve that problem that Shane and I were discussing?
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. A little bit about myself, and then I'll jump into that question. I have a PhD in behavioral economics. It's kind of
Well,
a
hold on. I'm going to stop you right there. So tell me about behavioral economics. This
yeah.
sounds kind of like Freakonomics. So
It,
you're basically then, is it true that you would be analyzing uh, the why people do things behind, or the financial motivations behind why people do things? Is that right?
the folks at Freakonomics took a financial view of that. The more general sense of it is um, people do things that may or may not seem rational, but they're also not very
Hmm.
good at remembering the things that they do. People are great at justifying, but they're not really good at remembering exactly all the things that we do. We live our days, in our moments, and most of those things are just sort of lost to us. We're not recognizing all those moments in time. And so what a
So
behavior
I get up and sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but this is very interesting to me, and so I'm going to take it where it
that's
goes.
fine.
If And I think this is so. I get up in the morning and I get back from working out and I want a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And depending on if I go to Starbucks or the coffee shop down the street, or I make it myself,
Sure.
there's something behind why I do that. Which one I pick.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yeah, and
And I just don't. I'm not aware of that thing that triggers me.
exactly. And typically in the field we call those system 1 and system 2 decisions. Most of our day we work on system 1 decisions. We know that around noontime I'm going to eat lunch, not because I'm hungry, but because I know that around noontime I eat lunch. It relieves my brain from doing a little bit of work. And people go through the day sort of relieving their brains of doing work. System 2 decisions,
Hmm.
they take work. In fact, it's funny. You spoke just a few minutes ago and said, "Well, it's like doing that wonky research." Well, that wonky research comment was really a system 2 comment. It's like that takes a lot of work, and so I won't do that. I'll do sort of
Hmm.
this system 1 work, which I know it sort of works, and I'll start there. And if it doesn't really work, then I'll engage in this thing called work. Um,
Shane, we do too much system one work. We got
Yeah.
to do more wonky
There
research.
you go.
Okay, no, that's great, Aldo. This is awesome. So please keep going.
and so,
So
yeah,
how much do you have to train your brain to do more system two work,
no,
or do we all do system one all the time?
we could not survive if we were working on system 2. I think that the thing that's important is engaging system 2 when it needs to. Otherwise, system 1 always wins, and you go, "Oh, well, I don't care anymore. Just do this."
Hmm.
Or I'm going to
Hmm.
stop because I've reached a level of frustration, or it's just not worth it, or whatever else comes into play. And that really, that idea was the genesis of this. In fact, I'll tell you a little bit more about my background before I jump into the research. As I said, I have a PhD in behavioral economics. I've been with Cooper Vision about 7 years, going on 8, and at Bausch and Lomb before that for about 12 years. So about 20 years, almost crossing 20 years in the industry. Prior to that, I worked for a defense contractor. So it was a government agency, which was really interesting, and probably a talk for another time. Um,
Yeah.
so
Is that a promise? Can I get you back on to talk about it?
yeah, absolutely. I'd love to come back.
All right.
Anyhow, as we talked about sort of what we wanted to do with this lens, one of the things that crosses my mind all the time is that we're really good at doing things like surveys and focus groups, but unfortunately what happens in those things is that people do their best. They're being as truthful as they can possibly be, but unfortunately it misses an enormous amount of information. It's just wide gaps in what's really going on. So I turned to friends of mine at Carnegie Mellon University, and Carnegie Mellon has a human design school which really focuses on what people do and how they do it. So I actually turned to those guys and said, hey, look, here's my problem. I know that things are going on. People are doing a variety of coping in order to live with presbyopia. Although when I ask them, I feel that I'm probably only scratching the surface of what's actually going on. Can you help me figure this out? And that's when they introduced me to the idea of, well, maybe we should do some ethnography research. Now, for those of us not
Wait, what kind?
Ethnography.
Okay.
Yeah. So
can you explain that?
Yeah. So ethnography is really interesting. What it does is it says, hey, how about I just observe you? I'm not going to ask you any questions. I'm actually going to try to be as invisible as I can possibly be to the situation, because I really want to just understand what you're doing. I don't want you to process it, because if you process it, unfortunately, system 2 jumps in, and then you'll give me a lot of reasons why, most of which are probably not the right answer.
Hello and welcome to the Gristwell Podcast on iCode Media. Today I had a great conversation with Dr. Michele Andrew, Dr. Aldo Zucaro, and Dr. Shane Foster about the research and the approach that CooperVision took to incorporate people's experiences in their daily lives into solving those problems from a multifocal standpoint. So we talked a lot about how did they come up with a mechanism to evaluate that for patients, and then how did they translate that into a lens that's going to be usable. And then Shane and I talked about how do we take that information clinically and help us refine our approach to understanding a patient's visual needs in practice. So please enjoy our conversation. As always, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, write a review, share it with your friends, and support those who support us. So what I wanted you all to talk about today was the development from a conception standpoint of a new product, and specifically I want to talk about the MyDay multifocal. But how do you conceive of this new product, and then how it gets filtered into how do we know this is going to be good for patients, and then how can we test that it's good for patients? And that's why I think that it's important, Michele, that we have all of you on today. So Michele, give me a sense of Cooper's approach to new products and new designs, and how does that work?
Hi, Chris. Great to be here again. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming on.
You know, when we at bringing new products to market, we always talk to the eye care professionals that prescribe them, and we talk to the wearers that wear them. And it's important for us to get those two perspectives. It's important to understand ultimately the person who's wearing the lenses, what do they love about what's currently available to them in the marketplace? What do they wish that they had that they don't have, and make sure we do more of what they like, and sort of correct and fill the gaps where there's things that they wish for that they don't have. And really the same thing from the eye care professional's perspective. And so we always go about it from those 2 points of view. What's unique with MyDay Multifocal is that we looked at the consumer research in a very different way, which it really revealed a necessity to understand the wearer's experience when they leave the practice. And it was that information, I think, really was informed the design of this lens in a unique and different way.
Well, I think that is helpful to understand, because, you know, from a clinician standpoint, I understand there's all these nuances. And Shane, maybe I just bring you in here as well. Like, I think I understand the nuances of different types of designs in general, but mostly once I get out of school, my approach has been, well, functionally based on this understanding of this particular lens, I think it's going to work best in these patients. But what is really helpful to me, and Shane, you've been involved in a lot of research, clinical research as well, is to say, okay, well, what about these designs on the back end work? But you're saying, Michele, that you're saying we can figure all of this out on the front end if we ask the right questions and get the right information. Is that correct?
Yes.
Shane, do you ever think about that? Like, if you think, because we'll get into the clinical stuff in just a second, but Shane, do you ever think about all those other designs when you're fitting a lens? Or do you take a little bit of a, like, what's your approach when you're fitting a multifocal contact lens in general? Are there things you're looking for in a patient?
Right. I think it's kind of difficult because I explain this to patients too when we start a fitting is all these lens designs are kind of proprietary. So we don't know exactly who they work best for. So we start with our go-to that seems to work for the majority of patients, and we go from there. So if a patient has difficulty with the first design, then we can tweak things, adjust the power here and there. And if it just really seems like we're not getting anywhere, we'll move to the next design. So I think that's what's been missing is kind of a way to figure out which lens is appropriate for which type of candidate. And I don't feel like I've ever had a good understanding of that from the fitting guides or from the industry.
Yeah, and I think the better questions we ask on the front end of what the needs are of our patients, I think the more we can understand if we're going to design a lens that will fit that type of patient. What is it about that patient that makes them unique and makes it work for so many? I think that's, because you get into, and we'll get probably into this a little bit more, Shane, but, I've always thought about, well, do I measure pupil sizes and different lighting and how accurate do I need to be there? If I were going to measure pupil sizes, is just my estimation in a clinical exam room, is that appropriate? Or would it be best if I used a widget on the front end and measured mesopic and photopic and scotopic conditions, so then I can say, okay, well, this design is going to be better or that design is going to be better. But nobody does that. I mean, unless you're actually doing really wonky research, which we need, but unless you're doing that, nobody's going to actually do that in clinical practice. So I think the cool part about this lens, from my understanding, is that, look, we have people that said, look, what do we need to solve? And that's where I want to ask you, Aldo, is how do you understand taking that idea of what do we need to solve for, and then how do you aggregate that information? How did you go about? First of all, Aldo, introduce yourself. Tell us what your role is in CooperVision, kind of your background, and then how do you solve that problem that Shane and I were discussing?
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. So a little bit about myself, and then I'll jump into that question. I have a PhD in behavioral economics.
Hold on. I'm going to stop you right there. So tell me about behavioral economics. This sounds kind of like Freakonomics. So you're basically then, is it true that you would be analyzing the why people do things behind, or the financial motivations behind why people do things? Is that right?
The folks at Freakonomics took a financial view of that. The more general sense of it is people do things that may or may not seem rational, but they're also not very good at remembering the things that they do. People are great at justifying, but they're not really good at remembering exactly all the things that we do. We live our days, in our moments, and most of those things are just sort of lost to us. We're not recognizing all those moments in time.
So I get up and sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but this is very interesting to me. And so I'm going to take it where it goes. That's
fine.
And I think this is, so I get up in the morning and I get back from working out and I want a cup of coffee. And depending on if I go to Starbucks or, the coffee shop down the street, or I make it myself, there's something behind why I do that which one I pick. Is that correct?
Right.
And I just I'm not aware of that thing that triggers me.
Exactly. And typically in the field, we call those system 1 and system 2 decisions. Most of our day, we work on system 1 decisions. We know that around noontime, I'm going to eat lunch, not because I'm hungry, but because I know that around noontime, I eat lunch. It relieves my brain from doing a little bit of work. And people go through the day sort of relieving their brains of doing work. System 2 decisions, they take work. In fact, it's funny. You spoke just a few minutes ago and said, well, it's like doing that wonky research. Well, that wonky research comment was really a system 2 comment. It's like, that takes a lot of work. And so I won't do that. I'll do sort of this system 1 work, which I know it sort of works, and I'll start there. And if it doesn't really work, then I'll engage in this thing called work.
Shane, we do too much system one work. We got to do more wonky research. Okay, no, that's great, Aldo. This is awesome. So please keep going. So how much do you have to train your brain to do more system 2 work, or
No.
do we all do system 1 all the time?
We could not survive if we were working on system 2. I think that the thing that's important is engaging system 2 when it needs to. Otherwise, system 1 always wins, and you go, oh well, I don't care anymore. Just do this, or I'm going to stop because I've reached a level of frustration, or it's just not worth it, or whatever else comes into play. And that really, that idea was the genesis of this. In fact, I'll tell you a little bit more about my background before I jump into the research. As I said, I have a PhD in behavioral economics. I've been with CooperVision about 7 years, going on 8, and at Bausch & Lomb before that for about 12 years. So about 20 years, almost crossing 20 years in the industry. Prior to that, I worked for a defense contractor. So it was a government agency, which was really interesting and probably a talk for another time.
Yeah. Is that a promise? Can I get you back on to talk about it?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
I'd love to come back. Anyhow, as we talked about sort of what we wanted to do with this lens, one of the things that crosses my mind all the time is that, we're really good at doing things like surveys and focus groups. But unfortunately, what happens in those things is that people do their best. They're being as truthful as they can possibly be. But unfortunately, it misses an enormous amount of information. It's just wide gaps in what's really going on. So I turned to friends of mine at Carnegie Mellon University, and Carnegie Mellon has a human design school, which really focuses on what people do and how they do it. So I actually turned to those guys and said, hey, look, here's my problem. I know that things are going on. People are doing a variety of coping in order to live with presbyopia. Although when I ask them, I feel that I'm probably only scratching the surface of what's actually going on. Can you help me figure this out? And that's when they introduced me to the idea of, well, maybe we should do some ethnography research.
Wait,
now for those of us not ethnography.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
So, yeah. So ethnography is really interesting. What it does is it says, hey, how about I just observe you? I'm not going to ask you any questions. I'm actually going to try to be as invisible as I can possibly be to the situation, because I really want to just understand what you're doing. I don't want you to process it, because if you process it, unfortunately, system 2 jumps in, and then you'll give me a lot of reasons why, most of which are probably not the right answer. So I just kind of want to watch you. And then ethnography does that. And so, it takes a little bit of time to set this up, and it takes a little bit of time to get the right participant. But imagine a participant. What we did to this participant is we outfitted them with a camera. So that there was a camera on their body. And then we also outfitted cameras in all of their rooms in their house. So not only were we seeing what they saw, but we saw the environment that they were in. So I was the proverbial fly on the wall for 14 people over an extended period of time. So we had 14 people, and we generated some 98 hours of video footage of just people engaging in life. And we saw some crazy things, and we saw some really hilarious things.
But they knew you were recording everything. It wasn't any of that crazy stuff.
No. Everybody knew what was going on. In fact, they were. It's funny because.
Do you think how long did it take them, do you think, to kind of get into their normal routine? Because, if I had a camera that was always watching what I was doing, I think at first I'd probably make sure I'm doing, I'm like organized. And then you walk into my office right now and it's, there's stuff everywhere. Did you see any more kind of normalization after the first couple hours or whatever? Yeah, actually, it wasn't even a few hours. After a little bit, people forgot. They forgot there was the camera in the room. They forgot they were wearing the camera. They sort of forgot. But what was really interesting is
we had these conversations with people beforehand about their vision and what they did, and then we looked afterwards, and nobody actually was able to properly recollect all the things that they were doing, all of their coping mechanisms in order to get by, the amount of time they switched between their distance vision or their near vision, or the frustrations that they encountered just in being able to read a bottle, to do the most basic and simplest of things. The one example that just sticks with me, because the lady was just so, she was beautiful in describing it, but she was cooking chicken, and she had a recipe, and she was in the kitchen, and she starts out by just kind of talking to us about doing this recipe. And that was about 2 or 3 minutes of conversation she's just having with herself, sort of knowing that we're there. But slowly she forgot all about that, because she started to get frustrated. She's like, I got to wash my hands every time I have to change a page. I have to change a page, and I have to get my glasses. I have to get my glasses because I can't see. I'm wearing contact lenses and they're not working. And now I have to wash my hands, and I have stuff frying. And you can see her anxiety level just increase and increase. And she's getting frustrated with the process of cooking. And then near the end, she's just talking. She's not even talking to us anymore. She's just talking. And she's like, I used to really like cooking, and I don't like cooking anymore. I don't like all of these things. And when you start to see people in this unfiltered fashion, when you start to sort of understand how vision and the tasks that they're doing are so intertwined into like their happiness state, their willingness to engage in other things, it changes the way we look at it. It absolutely changes the way we look at it.
So I have never had anybody tell me that detailed of a story about the problems or the challenges they're having with their vision. How do I ask better questions to draw that out of patients? Because certainly I've got patients, and Shane, you probably have patients that might say, oh yeah, when I read a cookbook. And like, but for me, I'm like, I'm not going down the fact of, oh yeah, she's having to put on reading glasses, wash her hand. I mean, like, I'm not thinking about all those other little nuances. So how do we tease out as clinicians those stories without telling somebody they're going to be involved in a trial that we're going to watch them do all these things? What's your perspective on that, Aldo?
Yeah, I think for us is that we're helping the clinician know that the shortcut that people are saying has a list of things behind it. And so what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to say, you asked a simple question, do you do a lot of cooking? And if that individual says, yeah, I do a lot of cooking, you know that they're going to be engaged in all these steps, and this is what's going on, and helping you understand how to get there much quicker. It's not that, you don't need to have a therapy session with people, but it is triggering all of the things that are behind it. So it's not as simple as or your level of understanding, even though the question is fairly basic and benign, has a much deeper part to it. And that's really what we did with the research. I mean, we spent the folks at Carnegie Mellon are great. Ashley and Ray Lynn are amazing professors at the school, and I learned quite a bit about how to interpret the data coming back, and how they apply empathy and how they apply compassion to the things that they're seeing. But what we did with their help is we created archetypes. We created these fictional people, and each one of these fictional people had this role in life that they played and they portrayed. And that's the kind of information we gave our R&D team. And we said, you're not fixing a problem about vision because you're trying to work some technical requirement.
And when you say technical requirement, you're saying not to just see a line on a chart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because the way Cindy engaged was, I need to be able to see, and Cindy is a real person. She's the woman with that did the cooking, but it's funny because I got to know them by name. I'm like, what's Beverly doing today? And how's Dean what's Dean doing today?
Do you text them? You should. You should just check in with them.
No,
See how they're doing. We learned, actually, Shane and I, when we were at the Vision Source, I'm going to mention this because we were at the Vision Source Exchange, and one of the things that stuck with me, Jesse Itzler talked, and do you know who Jesse Itzler is? He sold like some airline company to Warren Buffett and his conglomerate, and made like $200 million. His wife started Spanx. They're worth like $1 billion. And anyway, he came and gave us a keynote, and one of the things he said that was really impactful to me was just, you know, and you don't do this, like I wasn't, his reason for doing it was not because it was like he was going to get something out of it long term, but he was reflecting to say, I did get things out of it by just staying in contact with people. So like sending 3 texts a day, you know, just checking in on people. I just thought that's why it came up, and I've been trying to do that more, not because I think I'm going to get something out of it, but because like it just makes me feel more connected to the people that I like to be connected to. So anyway, yeah, you should text them. Sorry about that. That's a total sidebar, but keep going, please. So Cindy and
So what we did for the R&D team is we made these people with these tasks and these lives. And we said, look, the product that you're developing is for those tasks. The clinicals that you're setting up as you're working through whether you think the product is meeting those needs or not, you're setting that clinical up with an individual that's like Cindy, that's like Beverly, that's like Eileen. These are the people that you're solving. These are the problems that they have. These are very simple things. Can we think about solving the problem not in a clinical setting, but let's make sure that as we start to develop our product, we're making sure that the Eileens of the world, the Beverlys, the Cindys, they can do that task. And if they can do that task and they feel good about it, that's going to relate to the emotional sense that they have towards their vision, which means that I might not see 20/20 perfectly, but the things that I like to do each day, I get done really well. And so my vision is great.
Yeah, so that's interesting to me because we get so hung up clinically, and Shane, you can jump in here too if you have additional perspective, but we get so hung up clinically on the number. And I think when we get hung up on the number, I do think this is true, that that then our patients get hung up on the number. So like patient comes in and they're doing totally fine, or their perception is they're doing fine, and they come in and they're seeing 20/25 at distance and 20/30 at near, but they wouldn't even be aware of their 20/30 near vision. And then I stick this card in front of them that has 3 lines that they can't see, 20/25, 20/20, 20/15, and they're trying to hit those. And all of a sudden in their mind, did I already just plant something that made them feel like, oh, well, I can't see like I thought I could see. And so like, how do we as clinicians, because we got to check acuity, at least at distance, but how do we get that information to see whether they're doing well, if they are a Cindy, that they've been happy in their environment without like spoiling the cake? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. You know, I like asking very simple questions, and quite frankly, when we were doing the work, it was really in the simplicity. Just tell me the things that are bothering you. Where is it not working? And if it's and tell me the activities that you do. Do you cook? Are you having fun cooking? Do you watch TV? Do you do crossword puzzles? Do you drive at night? What are the things that you're doing, and where are you bothered in it? And we didn't look for an immense amount of detail underneath that from a clinical perspective with our R&D team, because what I said is, look, I understand. I've seen what I know the very detailed steps that are going on. And if somebody says they're okay and that level of frustration isn't there and that level of enjoyment is there, you got it right. Stop.
So then we're asking more emotional questions, is what I'm getting from you.
Yeah, one of the things that we discovered is that the emotional connection to vision when these were presbyopic people was much higher. It's the ability to accomplish what I want to do is much more important than the numeric number of I can see 20/20 at near and at far. That was less interesting. It was, am I emotionally satisfied And when people were emotionally satisfied, regardless of the exact number of their vision, that product worked.
That is so interesting.
And that's what was going on.
So interesting. Yeah. I mean, Shane, Aldo, I'm probably going to come back to you in just a second, but Shane, I want to get your perspective here. Are you doing any of that kind of stuff? Because, you know, as we talked before, as you and I have discussed many times about clinical research and your involvement in clinical research, you know, one of the things that I thought was really cool in doing this in our practice at this summer was even just the idea, the kind of questions that we were asking people to rank their existing vision with their existing contact lenses and then their new vision. Is a lot of what Aldo is talking about is invoking their emotional attachment. And what we found often was patients, and I asked them, you know, how are your contacts? Oh, they're fine. Well, is there anything I can improve about them? No, they're good. And then you ask them to rank their vision, and they're maybe a 7. Their comfort might be a 7. And so that actually informed me to say, well, we probably need to have these types of questionnaires on all of our contact lens patients all of the time. So first, do you do that on a regular basis with a kind of a study-like questionnaire on your contact lens patients just to get an assessment of how well they are doing?
No, we never have before. But, you know, after seeing some of those questions, and I had the same experience that you did, people that said, oh yeah, everything's fine. And then they rank them a 6 or a 7. And I'm like, everything's fine should be a 9 or a 10, yeah. I think. So I've kind of gotten into the habit of asking the question, how are you doing with them? But then even when somebody says everything's okay, you know, I'm going to go in, I'm going to over refract a little bit. I'm going to see if I can make it better, because I tell them, okay is good, but if we can make it better, would you like that? And of course, everybody says, well, sure, if I can see better, that would be great. One of the other things that I've done is made sure that when I dispense a pair of lenses and, you know, say, hey, you're going to have to really try this out in the real world. You know, you can read the chart in here, but that doesn't give us the information we need to know if this is going to be successful for you. So I encourage the patient to, you know, kind of like what Aldo was saying, is you forget about the things that you're having trouble with because you just get through your day. And I tell patients to be really cognizant of, when are you having trouble? Make note of that. So if you're saying, gosh, every time I sit in front of my computer, I struggle, and I'm trying to, you know, move forward or move back to try to find the right spot. You know, that can be with glasses or contact lenses, really, but it's a measure of their satisfaction in those different areas. And I want that feedback from them, so I know where I need to work when they come back for their follow-up. So I've tried to start having people make note of that, and it is helpful, because patients will say, okay, you told me to, you know, think about the activities, and gosh, you know what, I get through almost everything except when I drive at night. Well, then we know where we need to focus, or if we need to tweak the design or change to, you know, a single vision only in one eye, something like that. So that's been really helpful. But also using real world things. So like you said, we don't care if you're 2020, 2025, we want you to be 20 happy, is what I tell patients. And they kind of sign on to that. They're okay with that. Tips for that are just, don't give them the little J card with the tiny print.
Yeah.
Have them pull out their cell phone. Can you read your texts? Can you read your emails? Okay, that's good.
Yeah, it almost makes me think that, like, for those, I don't know how you'd articulate it in your chart, because we always like to know, okay, well, how well were they seeing here, there? But it almost makes me think that on those checks, the only thing that we look at, like from a numbers standpoint, is put up the 20/40 line and ask them to read it. Because that, from a liability standpoint, we're basically covering our basis by saying, look, you're legal to drive if something, right? That's all we, I mean, that's really what you care about, unless the patient's having a challenge. Because then you just say, here, can you read that? You know, that's what your tech does, the 20/40. And then the doctor comes in and asks the other questions. Like, so we don't even give them an opportunity to see all the other lower lines. You're just giving them one line and then asking them more about their visual day and what they need help with. And then you can introduce smaller lines if they need smaller lines and all that other kind of stuff. That's really interesting to me.
Yeah, that's how we always did it. We instruct our technicians not to start with the 20/20 line.
Yeah.
You know, you want to start at 20/40, 20/30. If they do that really easily, you can go to the next one. You know, if they start missing a letter or two, well, don't go on to the next line, because then it's going to feel like a failure to them or a disappointment. when really they're coming in with no complaints, but then they say, oh, well, I couldn't read that smallest line. There's something wrong with these.
Yep.
So
we're changing our systems on Monday for sure. We will change those in our practice. I mean, we walk them down, but I think on contact lens checks, when we have them back on these new designs, I think that's, Aldo, to your point, that's really key. And we can, again, we're going to know whether or not we need to go further by what the patient tells us, but we don't need to introduce uncertainty into the situation when a patient's completely happy. And I've done that before. A patient walks in and I ask them how they're doing. Oh, I'm doing great, but I'm not sure how well I'm doing because I can't see, and then they look at a 2015 line at near, you're like, you're fine. You're doing great. So Aldo, the things that Shane's talking about, when you get that information, how do you then translate that into the R&D to tell the story to the R&D team to say, this is how we need to design that lens, or this is what we're after? And do you know kind of what they're modifying and what things they're changing so those lenses achieve those types of things?
Yeah, so I don't know exactly what they're working in a variety of different pathways to sort of get at what offers sort of the cleanest or best answer for them. But what they are doing is they are testing those lenses on these patients who are doing these tasks and sort of going, hey, are we creating something that, one, is easy enough to do? I mean, we can create, nth degree of complexity, but is it marginally better than one that's not? And I think one of the things that came out is this design that's a much simpler design than others would think. Mostly because they're working towards making sure that people under certain conditions can do certain tasks. And you know what? They were able to do it. They're able to do it really well. And so, we from a standing back perspective, we'll go, wow, that lens seems to really work, or it's doing its job, or great design. It's actually a little different than that. It's actually being extremely thoughtful about what the lens is going to do and how it's going to solve that problem. And they didn't have that before. Before, what we did in the past is we created these requirements. And as a result of creating those requirements, they became very complicated in how they were solving that, because they were trying to get right into that requirement and solve it as best as they could with as much specificity and detail around that. And I don't know if it made a better lens. It made a more complicated lens, but I'm not quite sure it made a better lens. And I think what you're seeing with what they developed with this lens and the work that we sort of shared with them is a number of degrees of complexities went away. It made it easier for practitioners to think about, but at the same time, it makes it a lot easier for people to sort of engage with. And at the end of the day, that, quite frankly, that's what matters. If people are wearing the lens and go, you know what, this is great, I can do everything I wanted to do, perfect. Tell a friend.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where, once we have that device that we can offer to patients, then we get to see how this all works, and that's really, Shane. You and I can talk more about that. Is what you said before, is that contact lens companies always say we got this new lens, it's going to be newer and better. But in your experience so far, you've had this since the summer, we've had it since the summer, and we've been blown away as well. Like it is that good. So tell me a little bit about kind of your appraisal of that and where you see it working, where you've incorporated into your practice.
So I think one of the ways it's wowed me the most is with these really early emerging presbyopes that maybe aren't even, you might not even classify them as a presbyope yet, but almost somebody who's doing a lot of near work, like everybody is, but they're 40. Maybe they're not, measuring a full plus 1 1/4 on the binocular cross cylinder or something like that, but they're struggling a little bit. So they're having that difficulty adjusting focus from near to far. And I've had difficulty with those in other lenses because it distorts the distance vision too much for them.
Yes.
So a lot of complaints on these people that are like, okay, it's fine, I can just pop on readers real quick, or I just hold things out further. But this has worked amazingly well in those young emerging presbyopes, in my experience anyway. I have a patient that's always been over minus since I started seeing him a few years ago. And I keep trying to remove the minus because I know he's getting closer to 40 and it's going to be more difficult. And he just always rejects it. He will not kick out that extra minus. And so with this lens, I when I went to put the lenses or gave him the trials, I kind of wrote over the power so he couldn't see it because I knew that he would look at the power and say, these aren't going to be strong enough. He adapted to it, no problem. Put them in, boom. He said, these feel wonderful. I'm seeing everything perfectly. And then later realized that, well, you're actually in the correct power for you. So maybe that's part of the issue too.
I mean, I would share. Go ahead.
The only other one I was going to say was actually one of my technicians who's she just turned 40 and she's a hyperope. She's like a +4. So she's obviously starting to struggle with her near vision too, but she couldn't, she's tried many other multifocals and just can't do it. She said it just made her distance, to the point that she just couldn't function. So she put those on and she looked out the window and she said, oh, I can see the street sign out the window. Is that the way it's supposed to work? Yeah, it is. Right. So, and then she's like, wow, and I can focus on my computer now too. So, had those people that were we had them in like a really low really low powered monovision or something like that, just because they couldn't handle the distance blur. And I just feel like this is whatever is in that low ad design is working really, really well for those early presbyopes.
What I like about that, and I share your same experience, my approach always has been for early presbyopes, especially with the type of work that we're doing, is to try to get them into a multifocal lens as soon as possible, because I know that when they're 45 and 50, it's a lot easier for me to adjust those powers because they're more accepting of because they've already adapted to a component of that additional multifocal. And so but the biggest challenge is almost every single one of them that we've had before induces some degradation of distance acuity. And, for whatever you and I really fully understand, like, okay, well, our day is doing this all day long on a computer, so I don't need to see like a hawk all the time. So we're more accepting of it, but our patients aren't. And so that's been the beauty, is getting those patients earlier into it. And then we should have this whole, ability to transition them over the next 5 and 10 years is so much easier than waiting until they're finally like fed up enough with whatever and they're willing to now compromise some of their distance vision. And so I totally agree with you. I think that's kind of the pinnacle of what we can do. I also want to talk a little bit about, because we haven't had this issue, but Michele, we did have a panel discussion last month. Actually, it was 2 months ago now, where we sort of got a perspective of presbyopia in general from the public. And I think there were 5 or 6 people on that. And Shane, that panel discussion, what was interesting to me was, first, one of the things that kept coming up was that their doctors weren't talking to them about options. And one of the things I thought about was probably I don't think they were lying about it. I think what happens is, just like you and I, when we go to the doctor, we might hear the thing that's really important or bothering us, but we don't hear all the other stuff they talk about, or we hear it, but it doesn't stick. So one of the things that I gathered from that is not to say that the doctor that they're seeing isn't doing a good job. It's that we probably need to do a better job when they are in their late 30s by saying, look, this is what you're doing now, and we're going to do X, Y, and Z now to make it so that you can do those things easier, but we're also going to do ABC in a year or 2 years, because it's going to be more of that. where as opposed to just saying something like, well, in a year you're going to get presbyopia and then we'll address it at that time. And it's like in one ear and out the other. But I think the point is trying to make it concrete to them earlier so that they don't feel like we never talk to them about it. Because my worst fear is a patient hears about a new technology and they didn't hear it from me. And so what are your thoughts about how do you plant that seed early enough so when those emerging presbyopes come back, they're not waiting to get frustrated to talk to you about those things?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I start, in the late 30s, start talking about how, hey, you're doing great with these. Hey, your near vision's still good, but it's going to be coming. And I start to have that conversation about presbyopia even in the mid to late 30s. Because, between 20 and 30, I mean, most people, their vision's not changing a whole lot. Things are working pretty well. So it's a great way to celebrate, hey, things are stable. Your prescription's not changed. But just so you know, the next thing that you're going to be looking for is a little bit of trouble with near work. And they'll, I say, oh yeah, my parents were readers or something like that. So it's a good way to start that conversation with them. And then they're not taken aback by it when it actually happens. What is it? I think they say people have to hear things how many times? 3 times or something to really let it sink in. So if you have that conversation, starting at 37 and then say it at 38, 39, they've heard it enough times that they're not caught off guard by it and they're more accepting of it.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is when they're already wearing a contact lens and they're doing great with it, especially if that contact lens is available in a multifocal, you just let them know, hey, when you get to that point, it's a really easy switch. They make this same lens in a multifocal that'll allow you to just keeps your eyes relaxed a little bit. I try not to say the bifocal word.
Yeah, I know, me too.
Too early on. Just say this lens is going to relax your eyes a little bit with your computer work because let's face it, we're all staring at a screen, hours and hours every day. So everybody gets the concept. It's just, like you said, introducing it early and then walking them through that process.
Well, the other thing, exactly right. And the other thing that I gathered from it, and again, I think there was only one person that was of the panel that was really on this, but it was he kept making the point that it has to be convenient, it can't interrupt his life, and it has to be, I think he said cheap, but I don't think that's what he meant. It just has to work in his budget. And then the other the thing I think about that is that as doctors, oftentimes we think, okay, well, a daily multifocal lens, that's going to be expensive. My patients aren't going to want it, right? But tell me about that and tell me your approach to thinking about, look, first of all, these things aren't expensive relative to all the other things that we do. The cup of coffee that almost everybody gets on their way to work, as I was just suggesting, or most of what people are doing. But how do you frame that in your mind about cost, and how do we have those conversations with patients so that it's not detracting to offering them the best technology available?
Right. I mean, it's our practice philosophy to always recommend what is the best treatment option for that patient. We're in an area that's, a little economically depressed. So we understand that there are going to be some financial concerns from our patients. But I think our duty as a clinician is to always offer the best treatment option. So that's what we do. And if that means it's a daily multifocal lens, that's what I'm going to offer them. And then knowing that there are different ways that, we talk to them about the rebates. We talk to them about, kind of like you said, comparing it to a cup of coffee. If we break it down and say, hey, daily, this is what this costs you. What's it worth to you to be able to see distance and up close and everything, and have the convenience of a daily disposable and the fact that it's the cleanest, safest, and healthiest option for your eyes. I have that discussion with every single patient. And, if it still is not something that works for them, well, then we go to a monthly or a 2-week or something. But again, I think we made it a philosophy in our practice. All of our doctors agreed that dailies are the way to go. And when you get a material like the MyDay that's so comfortable, again, you're not going to have the dryness issues, and you're not going to have the complaints of end of day dryness like you would with something else. So having that discussion, it's just a philosophy you have to get into, is always offering the best treatment option and then going from there, not prejudging the patient, thinking, oh, I don't know if they can afford this, because that's a disservice to your patient.
Well, and it also, it assumes that if you just go with that right away, you're making the decision that they can't afford something immediately. Like if I'm just like, right, look, it's an expensive lens, and then they think, oh, well, it's expensive. The doctor thinks it's expensive. Well, as opposed to like not even having that conversation. I mean, if a patient brings it up, well, how much more is this? Well, you can say, with rebates and discounts on annual supplies, this is not that much more expensive than a monthly lens or a 2-week lens that you're having to clean and store by the time you factor in all of those other things. And by the way, if we can avoid one infection or inflammation event per year, you're on the plus side of it, right? So right, by making having that conversation with patients, you can just you offer them the technology, and then they get to experience it. And once they experience it and they say, oh, it's that much? That's over my budget. Okay, well, we can put you in something else, and it might not work as well, but we'll do it. But you don't have to say that, but that might be your approach. I'm going to put you in something else. Now they've at least seen, okay, well, we can do this, and it can solve the problem that I have. But maybe it is too expensive for that patient, but we've allowed them to experience it first and then make the determination that if it is too expensive, fine, we have these other options, and they can balance out that. As opposed to, I think oftentimes when the first thing that comes up is price or cost, then it can make us avoid all these other treatment options that might be really great for that patient and actually quite cost effective, without giving them the ability to at least see, because now they can judge, oh, this is worth it to me. I think that's so important, and that's been our practice philosophy as well.
Yeah, we have the same. We basically discuss our fitting cost with the patient up front, because it's going to be the same fitting cost regardless of what design you go into. That's the way we do it in my practice anyway. And then from there, let them experience the greatest, latest, greatest, best technology, most comfortable lens out there. And then the patient can decide. I mean, it might take an extra visit, a little bit more time in your chair, but I think once you give patients that premium lens, they understand why it costs more, and they, 9 times out of 10, they're going to go with that one because they see the value.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you and I could probably, go ahead, Michele, please.
It's this conversation is reminding me of something, Chris, that you said earlier in the story that Aldo shared about the woman cooking. Chris, you asked the question about how can we ask a better question to help our patients? And, the value proposition is really the value to the patient, in the same way that Aldo talked about. If the patient's happy with their vision, that has an emotional component. And so a question to a patient, tell me about the last time you were really frustrated wearing your glasses, for example, or tell me about the last time your vision really frustrated you. If that woman had said, oh, I love to cook and I can't cook anymore, and it might evoke that we wouldn't otherwise get because people don't remember. And then to be able to offer a product to say, well, what if I could give you a contact lens that would change that for you? Now you're having a conversation about a premium lifestyle and a quality of life versus a premium product and the cost of that. And that puts everything back into the hands of the patient and gives them the opportunity to decide how they live their lives with different options for visual correction. And it changes the conversation completely. I think it really ties back to what we learned from the ethnography research, which is there's a high emotional value to vision, and it exceeds the cost of any product, regardless of where that product is. And it's for the patient to determine. And so tying it back to lifestyle and giving them the option to live their best life, they'll decide where that value proposition is.
Michele, you always summarize our conversation so well. I don't think we should continue. That was perfect. I'm going to be respectful of your time, Shane, Michele, Aldo, this gave me a ton of insight. Aldo, I am going to plan on picking your brain more about behavioral economics. And thanks so much for being on and taking the time today to give us your perspectives about this new technology and how we arrived at the MyDay multifocal.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Chris.